Good afternoon. How are you? Okay, thank you for finding us in this room today. We are part of the Lighthouse Project, which was instigated by the KHDA at the end of last year. And it was a collaborative project for principals to be involved, working together, investigating how other countries are developing and working with their education teams and their education systems to be able to make improvement with relation to the OECD PISA results in particular. And it was a collaborative investigation really to see if we could bring good ideas from our research into schools in Dubai. So I'd like to introduce ourselves. We are the Hong Kong team. Some of you may have been in the Chile presentation earlier on today. Each group of principals were given a particular city or a particular country to investigate. And so today we'll be introducing to you Hong Kong and the work that the Education Department has been doing in Hong Kong to develop their PISA scores and develop their education system overall. Okay, so if we're going to quickly introduce the team, we've got Heather, and we've got Maureen, myself, I'm Lee Davis, and we also need to recognise Tammy Tusek, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. Hong Kong. You saw the photograph at the very beginning. Big, dynamic, bright city, modern city. Certainly many, many parallels between Hong Kong as a city and Dubai as a city in terms of its background and also its aspiration. It's in Asia, southern China. Used to be part of the UK, but as many of you might remember, it reverted back to China about 14 years ago. So it's certainly gone through an administrative change, but the overall aspiration and goals of the city and the country are the same. Some facts, just to give you some background. These are some interesting things that we came up with. The population's just over 7.5 million in a very, very small land area. So it's a very densely populated city. But it has quite a high GDP, gross domestic product, or in other words, how much income each member of the adult population makes relative. 9th in the world. So it has a potentially a very, very high standard of living. I must say, however, it's also a very, very expensive place to actually live in. So that needs to be factored in and considered. However, the government is very clearly focused on the development of education within Hong Kong. 18% in 2015 of government spend was spent on education. That's huge. 10% is a normal figure in a well-developed country. So 18%, they have certainly put a very special focus on education and education development. We put the last indicator on. I'm sure that if we said Hong Kong and the education system in Hong Kong, you will have certain facts that you know already come to mind. Certainly within the Asian and the South Asian particular frame, the idea of very much into rote learning, high pressure to get into university, high suicide rates amongst young people because of the pressure the parents put on them in order to be able to achieve high results to get into university, are the sort of common interpretations and things that people talk about when they talk about places like Hong Kong, Singapore, Shanghai, with its young population. The Happy Planet Index is an international global index, and Hong Kong came in at 105th out of 151. So not particularly high. Now that's for the general population. They also do a children's happiness index as well. There's an echo there to things that are happening in Dubai at the moment. The index again was established purely to try and find some measure of how children feel about themselves within the city, and to try and judge whether reforms that were being made are having a positive or a negative impact on children's self-awareness. Now, PISA ratings. Why were we chosen specifically to look at Hong Kong? Their PISA results are outstanding. They're currently ranked 3rd in the PISA tables. So, okay, they're right at the top. So they must be doing something that's right. And so our task and our journey, if you like, was to investigate and try and find out what it was specifically that Hong Kong were doing in order to achieve the PISA outcomes that they had. In fact, between 2009 and 2012, they've improved further. To give you some relation for the other columns there, the white column is the current status of the UAE. The column to the right of the UAE is the OECD average. So they are very much almost double the average, right at the very, very top. So with this investment in education that they have certainly put in, and the education reforms that have been in place since the year 2000, 2001, when they really began to focus on the development of education. With the fact that their PISA scores are so good, I wonder if just for a moment that you would like to think, what is it that they've done then to their education system to change it, improve it, and support the development of their young people in order to be able to achieve the high results that they have within PISA. I wonder if you could just talk to the person next to you for a couple of minutes to see what things you think they might have implemented in order to achieve that. Okay. And I know I'm asking you to do this blind with no information from the country itself, apart from you will have a consideration about what it might look like in a classroom in Hong Kong. So what have they done to change it?
Could I just ask for raised hands now, just any ideas that you think might be useful for us just to make a note of at this stage of the presentation, and then by the end you'll see whether you're on the right tracks. Any ideas? What do you think? Investing in teachers. Investing in teachers. What do you mean? What do you want to elaborate? So you mean like CPD? Right, CPD for teachers. Okay. CPD for teachers. Anything else? Any other hands? Yes, ladies?
Flipping the way teaching is done.
Shaping the way teaching.
Flipping.
Oh, flipping. Okay, so flipped teaching and learning.
And more focused on the 21st century school.
Okay, flipped teaching and learning. Okay, anybody else? Yes?
I would say maybe policies, big policies.
Changing policies.
Could be inclusion more.
Okay, greater inclusion. And you said about policies, changing policy, improving policy.
The whole government policy.
Changing policies. And that's government. Anybody else? Yes?
Learners population.
So what do you mean by the learning population? Do you mean reducing class sizes, perhaps, things like that? Okay.
Reducing class sizes. That's an interesting one. Okay. Reduction in class sizes. Okay. And do you have something?
Yeah. The quality of the teachers, experienced teachers.
Right. More experienced teachers. Okay. More experienced teachers.
And trained teachers.
Yeah. Better qualifications, maybe.
Is that what you were going to say, Al, as well?
No, it's going to come under the government changing policies, resourcing, financing, funding. Also.
The funding side of things, which I've already intimated.
Exactly.
That's right, that there is certainly an investment.
Should we put greater funding,
Yeah.
improved funding?
I would say
Improved funding.
curriculum designing or changing or modifying of the curriculum.
Okay, modification of curriculum. My pen's running out.
That's
Anybody
great.
else?
There's some great ideas.
Start. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Anybody? Parental involvement. We haven't got
Parents,
that yet. That's
yeah.
great. Parental involvement.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
There's some great ideas there. Thank you very much. Now, we could go into a section in terms of our presentation now where I then now speak about our research and what we found to answer these particular points to see whether they are valid or not, as to whether Hong Kong really have inputted them. However, I think that might be just a little bit boring. So, at great expense, we have managed to secure a satellite link to the Minister of Education of Hong Kong, who will now, in a short video presentation, be able to share exactly what they have done.
When we look at these international assessments, Hong Kong students do extremely well. Hong Kong has emerged as one of the world leaders when it comes to education. What do you attribute to success?
I believe Hong Kong has been doing pretty well for the last 2 rounds of assessment. We call it PISA, Program for International Student Performance. If you look at the result of it, and this improvement between the last one versus the latest one, marked the year 2012. And number 2 in the world on both the reading as well on science, and number 3 in terms of the mathematics. If you ask me why are we doing that well, I think there would be a few reasons for that. The first one relates to the curriculum, because since year 2000, and we have a team of expertise in Hong Kong drafting the education reform for the next 10, 15 years. And since then, we've been conducting a lot of the education reform in various stages of the education, all the way from the primary school, secondary education, to the tertiary. And this continual, what I call continual improvement and continual renewal, constant renewal, I believe is the first reason. What we're trying to do is trying to find ways to do better every day. So that's the first. Second one relates to the fortune we have of a big team of very dedicated teachers who are very professional, who work very hard and dedicated for the benefit, interest of the students. They've been doing a lot of self-improvement, sharing of a teaching and learning process, starting with the self-improvement, the continual professional development programs every year.
Right.
For the teachers, every 3 years, they need to come up with 150 hours of professional development.
Right. You know, in 1997, of course, Hong Kong became independent. It got independence from Britain. At that point, did Hong Kong have to change its education system completely? Did you have to redevelop, start a new education system, or is what you have now basically, is it a hybrid between what the British left you, the legacy of the British system, and developing something new?
Right after the 1997, life continues as it has been until year 2000. We believe it's time to have an overhaul of what the education will be heading for the next 10 years. That's why the year 2000 marked a major year of review. It has nothing to do with the 1997 return to the motherland. Rather, it's an ongoing education reform process for the last 7 years of Hong Kong.
Now, in the 60s, the education system was based largely on, I guess, what you call rote learning or drills. Has that changed in any significant way? And I mean, do you place emphasis now on things like multi-dimensional thinking or what is known as critical thinking?
Before the education reform, we had the problem of the overemphasis in terms of examination. And students would spend too much time focusing on either the science stream or the art stream, and then without attending to their own interest and ability. That had changed. Since year 2000, we marked the reform, and in the year 2009, actually we insert a new senior secondary curriculum, as you described that as a much broader base. Instead of just a traditional Chinese English as the language subjects, mathematics, and around 10 to 20 standard options or choices like physics, chemistry, and so on. We had a major reform of the curriculum since 2009. From then on, we have four compulsory subjects, adding on other than English, Chinese, mathematics. We also have the liberal studies. Reason for that compulsory subject, liberal studies, to ensure we enrich every student's common sense, the sense of independent thinking, sense of logic, as well as sense of competence. And then we also have about 20 elective subjects for students to choose. On top of that, we believe the world is moving multi-dimensions. That's why we provide another 37 applied learning subjects of all kinds. Some of those would have the professional stream. Some of those would have a vocational stream. On top of that, Hong Kong has been very much bilingual. We would like to offer students another option of trilingual. Right. Therefore, we also offer additionally 6 other languages for students to choose.
Okay. Now, what about the use of technology in schools? How much emphasis do you place on the use?
This is good question. What's important is we have spent 15 years for the last 5-year plan. So 3 of the 5-year plans now is 15 years gone in terms of the IT in education programs. And we spent almost like 9 billion Hong Kong dollar just for that reasons, over $1 billion US and 1.2 billion US. Trying to make sure the schools would have phase 1, building of infrastructure, hardware in particular. Second, the readiness of teachers and schools. Third, in terms of the piloting, experimenting of the new technologies and the deployment of it.
Yeah, I just want to get one other question there and ask you, what do you think countries like the United States can learn from the Hong Kong experience?
I believe the couple of areas I think we can share more between the two places. The first one is Hong Kong really focusing on continuous and constant renewal. This never stops. Second, Hong Kong has launched a very strong engagement arrangement as an operating style in running the education services here. Everyone gets involved, including the parents, students, teachers, alumni, as well as school management. The third thing I consider important is the commitment from the government. The education we spend would contribute to around 21.8% of the total government spending, massive spending, so to speak, in the government here for several years.
Okay, I want to get one other question, and that is, a little later in the program, we're going to have a report from South Korea, where you're finding that there's a lot of pressure from parents and from the education system on students themselves. Pressure to succeed, and parents needing to spend more money on their children's education as well. Do you have that similar kind of problem in Hong Kong?
We had that problem before, and we still have that problem right now. What we're trying to do is try to understand what does that mean. Parents' expectation on students would be one of the key areas. That's why when we are conducting the education reform right now, we put a lot of equal emphasis in terms of parental education and parental engagement so that they understand. We also try to have the round table between students and parents in a big group so that they talk to each other as well. These are two areas to make sure parents with more information, direct information, to ease their mind.
Okay, so we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We are going to take a break right now. Coming up later, what can be done about the 28 million children?
Not what you expected, though.
We know a lot.
We know a lot, but did the images that you saw of the classrooms,
Yes.
was that what you expected? That's more to carry on.
Okay, part of our work as the Hong Kong group, I have to say at this point that we started out with 8 or 9 principals, and we've kind of dwindled down to 3 of us, with people having lots of prior commitments, etc. But we've persevered nonetheless. And one of our meetings was about brainstorming and looking at what specifically had led to improvements in the PISA results for Hong Kong. And there's a whole wealth of rationale behind the improvements. 1 or 2 things that we picked out, and Lee has already mentioned in the prior slides, is about the happiness index. And it's interesting finding out what makes a child happy at school. I actually trialled that in my own school and found that it's all to do with their friends. It's nothing to do with the school. Have they got their best friend in the class? Great, I'm happy. And that's from 5-year-olds right through to 11-year-olds. Don't know about the secondary angle, but it might be interesting for those of you who are in secondary schools just to trial that. It was just a simple one about, are you happy at school? What makes you happy? And they had to name different factors that made them happy. It took everyone about 2 minutes to complete it. Another one was about critical thinking and move away from textbooks. But when we started to watch lots of video clips, is everything all right?
We have a supply for you?
A supply? No, we don't need that. Okay. Caissons? Caissons. When we started to watch lots of video clips about Hong Kong, we didn't really see the move away from textbooks in terms of real hard evidence. They seem to be still working with, and something that came up on here, rather large class sizes, average being at least 30 in a class. In Dubai, we're used to very much smaller numbers than that in the majority of schools. More autonomy for teachers, encouraged to think creatively outside the box, higher order thinking, bringing in Bloom's taxonomy, etc. We weren't actually seeing evidence of that in Hong Kong, but all the writing about Hong Kong is saying, yes, we're doing it. We just couldn't find any hard evidence, could we? And we looked at the expenditure, and the bottom part of this slide is about the $10 billion on IT, a Learning to Learn initiative, a pilot on e-learning, e-texts, and the last one from 2011 to present day on reading and libraries. And we decided we were going to have another look at the Reading and the Libraries initiative, because that seems to be something that has led to significant improvements. And it's interesting that we now have the UAE Year of Reading, just Dubai or the whole of the UAE Year of Reading. So Hong Kong decided to invest in more libraries and increase budget for reading and ways in which they could raise achievement in reading right across the country. And I know that's something that's happening in lots of schools in Dubai at this present moment, trying to enthuse children to read more. Because when Lee talked about the results for Hong Kong in the PISA tests and compared them to the UAE results, and we discovered that for reading and science, Hong Kong came out number 2 in the world in 2012 and in 3rd place for mathematics. How did they manage to do that? And that's a very big question mark. In classrooms where there can be up to 30 children, lots of rote learning still going on, although they're talking about the investment in IT. We're not seeing children like we are in our schools wandering around with their own devices. Lots of use of iPads, etc. It's very much back to the old school of the 3 R's, if you like, and a huge emphasis on the reading part of that. So
the declared data is kind of like away from the reality. Is that what we can get?
Well, it looks as though what they're saying about not teaching to the test may not actually be what's happening, you know, in our opinion, as a Hong Kong group. I have no evidence of that because all the write-ups say it's quite different. There's been a huge investment in e-learning. So, you know, what is it about the reading then? You know, I know in my own school, we were told in the feedback from the PEARLS test, which is the literacy test, that we needed to have more of an emphasis on inference and deduction. So, in other words, greater understanding of the text. So we've introduced, you know, accelerated reading. We're doing, you know, a drive towards everybody doubling the amount of time they're reading, and lots of opportunities for reading on a daily basis, daily phonics, streaming for phonics, etc. So, and yet, when we looked at Hong Kong and all the evidence that was out there, we couldn't find any evidence of those sorts of initiatives. Did you want to come in now, Heather, and make any comments?
Oh, only that the curriculum reforms, I think it's all relative and where they come from in the past. Mm-hmm. And so they have made strides, but it's perhaps not as forward-thinking on a 21st century style classroom as we might be thinking about for Dubai.
To be honest, this kind of result that you found out, it sounds very reasonable for me, because even by the way, I don't know, I've read like recently a research written by Ofsted. Even Ofsted nowadays, they are returning back to the books towards like teaching through the books more, because it might lead to a point that we found out that the way that we are teaching, however, like the more student-centered, does not get
not quite
kind of results in PISAs.
No,
that's what I feel.
No, not quite, because they did move away from textbooks in the way they were using textbooks in the past. What they're doing now is using them as a resource. So in the days in the past, it was very much learning from the textbook on the board. You do page 1 today, you do page 2 tomorrow. They're still using books as we saw in the video, but much more selectively.
But also we saw a very directed
yes,
teaching, very teacher-centered stuff,
yes.
right?
Yeah, there's still that.
But what they've done with that teacher-centered style is bring in the critical thinking as part of the teacher's repertoire of teaching skills. So it's more a mixed approach to teaching and learning. So they haven't gone maybe too far away and changed their style completely. They've retained some of the traditional methods, but also brought
I'm
in.
not with, but I can see it very effective.
Yeah.
I'm not with, but it's very effective.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And
And
a time for us to reflect.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about what you thought before you saw our presentation. So what do you think were the main factors that contributed to the rise in PISA scores in Hong Kong, and which ones do you think had the most impact? Do you want to just discuss that amongst yourselves for 2 minutes? Thank you. Yeah, I'll see if that comes out actually. Yeah. Probably 2 minutes now. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Okay, and stop everybody. Thank you. Mid-thought perhaps. Would you like to share now? Would you like to share now?
Very animated, it's really good.
Would you like to share what your thoughts are? Okay, yes.
I'm wondering, what is your opinion about that? Are we teaching for the test, and is this what it's supposed to be? And is PISA the main priority, or is it actually like retaining and enjoying learning and retaining a lifelong?
Yeah. In an ideal world, yes. But the contributory factors which lead to higher test results are a wealth of aspects of education, and it can't just be embroiled in one subject area. We talked about the happiness index, we talked about e-learning, and the move away from the textbook approach the way it had been many years before.
But you said that actually that is what they somehow
But
said,
the-
but
but-
actually in real life they were not really doing. They were still following
There's no, what I said was there's no real evidence that they've come away from the rote learning, because every time we went back and watched more video clips and found more evidence, the children seemed to be sitting in rows in the classroom. The teacher was standing doing the chalk and talk, yet we saw a little bit more evidence of children using computers but not going round with their own device under their arms, which is what we see in many of our schools in Dubai today.
So we have two questions now. Do you want
Can I just move on to somebody else, because at the moment we're just asking, which are the main factors. So you're asking about, is it rote learning, and is that what we should be doing? What do you think?
I'm just thinking, the Happy Planet Index, the scoring there, and PISA scoring, is that related in any way? Do they become
They're
more
saying it
happy
is.
when they score higher? Is that?
Everyone's happier when they score higher.
Are they?
I am, as a principal. If my performance management is wow, off the scale, I'm the happiest person in Dubai. Believe me.
The International Happiness Index, which was quoted at the beginning, is not just focused on education, it covers the whole breadth
Everything.
of life within the city. So education is a very small part of that.
Fine.
But it was just there as a sort of indicator of the mindset of the people living within Hong Kong itself.
Okay, brings me to my next question.
Yes.
Does the culture is there a correlation between the high happiness index and the high PISA scores? Is there a correlation between?
One of the happiest places in the world is Bhutan. I don't think they appear anywhere in these tables.
My next question is
Right, we have another question here. Thank you.
culture in Hong Kong, is it, does that have to do anything with the way, how can I ask that? But Dubai is there's a lot of, it's a melting pot. Lots
Yes.
of cultures here.
Yes.
Is the culture contributing to the scores?
We didn't find. Go on, Lee. Go on. You're nodding your head.
Yeah, you could say that there is, from a historical perspective, the very strong discipline and expectation, which has been the past view of education from both the teachers as well as the parents.
Yes.
That has set a high expectation of behaviour and attainment. Certainly has got to be a contributing factor to success in examination. However, one of the things that the Minister did say very clearly is that they have added that fourth compulsory subject into the curriculum at secondary level, which is about that whole critical thinking piece and that whole development of a person as a person. And I think that has had a very significant influence on PISA outcomes, because those kinds of questions that appear in those tests are very much aligned to the work that goes on in those sorts of sessions and lessons. So I think there's still very much a very traditional element of core teaching that goes on, but there has been significant curriculum
development
injections that have had a big impact in that overall ability of the students to have, if you like, a wider repertoire at their disposal to be able to answer the sort of questions that PISA will be challenging.
But you would say it's a contribution.
Exactly. So there is a very stable, very high aspiring education system in the first instance. What they've done is they've then added to that in a way in order to allow it to engage with a slightly different assessment approach, which is the PISA approach. And the way that they've done that is to focus on reading, because in order to access the inference that's required within the PISA sort of questioning, a high level of the reading ability is required. They've looked at the IT and bringing classrooms up to date with IT, certainly from the perspective of the teacher to be able to use IT to support and learn. So they focused on that. But I think they've also focused specifically on the IT for teachers, to help teachers themselves develop, get access to forums and other media, so that they themselves as a teaching body can actually work together and share best practice. One of the key things the Minister said right at the very, very beginning was that whole piece about development of teachers and the sharing of teachers' knowledge between themselves and engaging them in the process of reform and development. And over 3 years, 150 hours? 150 hours in 3 years of professional development. That's a lot.
That is a lot.
That is a lot.
You'd struggle to get that in.
So that in itself, if you like, has been the third strand of development, is getting teachers to look at themselves and how students learn so that they can get the best out of them in the classrooms. You're right, the classrooms may still look the same. If you like, the mindset of the student in how they should behave and perform in a school setting is still quite traditional and still quite there. So they have a very strong platform from which to actually build from. But I think they have certainly put quite a few things in place to help them build on that platform. And those key things that we've talked about in there are actually key things that is being implemented here in Dubai as well. And I'm sure that there's no coincidence that the key things from Hong Kong are also being mirrored and echoed or being encouraged to be implemented in the education system in Dubai as well.
Anybody else?
I was just
Yes.
to ask whether any of the things that you found out have caused things for you to change in your school, like whether they've had an impact on anything that you're doing specifically, whether you've found anything to help.
It was very interesting that, very early on when we started to meet as a group, we actually thought about a year of reading. And then suddenly it was launched in Dubai. And there was no coincidence with that really, because we're all thinking on the same lines. What is at the core of education? And it has to be a child's ability to read, and to read so well that there are no barriers to learning. So fluency at as early an age as possible, and then able to comprehend really well and start to use dictionaries, thesauruses as early as possible, whether they're digital or real books. And that was something I think, lots of schools in Dubai have already started to focus on. I know my own school, we've had a huge drive on reading, and we're still thinking about what more we can do, and it's relentless. And I think, that's what we're saying here, that it's continuous improvement. Never dropping the baton, never thinking, right, literacy, maths and science are okay now, so we're going to put them on a shelf over here. It's looking at them again and again in different ways to try and find out if there's some way that standards can be further lifted, because this is all about standards. If standards are high, you can then start to measure improvement very, very clearly. But until standards are high, you have to keep looking at whether children can read, write, spell. Can they compute in mathematics? What's the mental oral maths like in your school? What about earth sciences in science, and children relating all those areas to real life? Because that's something that I believe they'd started to do in Hong Kong as well, was have this relevance to the real world. And that does make a difference. The times that you're in a classroom teaching, or if you're in a senior leadership position and you're going into classrooms to observe lessons, and you hear that the lesson is very related to a child's own life and their own prior experiences, what do you notice about the learning? What do you notice? It's more successful, isn't it? And children will enjoy it more, they'll go away from the lesson and think, gosh, really love that, and they keep it with them, and it starts to then build up in terms of higher standards, clearer understanding, etc. Anybody else?
I just want to ask about the question, the language they use in PISA. Is it Chinese
Yes.
or English?
To be honest, we've been thinking about this as well. We're not sure, because they do test the government system as well as the private system.
Yes.
Didn't we find that out, its own language?
If all the testing is done in English,
I think it's
that I think
Based on
I think you're right. I think the government system
I
may
think
well
it's
be
not.
tested in Chinese, which brings in an additional challenge for Dubai, of course, because
It is all in
75 to
English,
80% of the students that take the PISA tests that we are providing
And not English first language.
I read about that.
Yeah,
And
it's
even
second
Finland,
language.
by the way, having the same thing. They are having these assessments
In Finnish.
their own Finnish
Yeah.
language. So that makes a little bit
Yeah.
advanced.
Which,
And
when we think about it then, should ring the alarm bell in our own minds even louder for the development of reading within our school context, but the
Yes.
reading of English, because the majority of our students are second language.
Yeah.
So the emphasis on reading could be the one key component that you can implement within your schools in order to be able to increase pupils' ability to answer on PISA tests. It's not just PISA tests. Basically, to improve your students' ability to
Yes.
engage in the wider world
Yes.
that is that global marketplace.
And I think you're quite right. I remember us discussing earlier on in our research about the language that the tests were presented in, and I'm pretty sure as well that I can't remember exactly, but I think it's in the language of the country. The fact that a lot of our schools in Dubai teach in the medium of English means that we test in the medium of English. Any other questions? The final part is, do you think there are any surprises, things that you thought, wow, I didn't know that? Want to share those surprises with us? Or anything that you felt had no impact on the improvement in attainment as far as PISA tests are concerned?
From those initial ideas,
Yes.
there appeared to be no reduction in class sizes. So
Exactly. And the one thing that Lee mentioned as well that no one's actually talked about at length is about the children's behaviour. And that's a huge factor in any classroom. If the children are impeccably behaved, what's going to happen?
Learning.
Yeah, they're going to learn. So the reduction in class sizes, there's still classes of 30 and more in Hong Kong, typical across the whole of Hong Kong, regardless of the type of school. And the behaviour is impeccable.
And no additional adults as well. I don't think if any of those videos you'd have seen a classroom assistant. So that's an interesting.
So 30 children, one teacher, impeccable behaviour, and amazing, amazing, amazing standards in all aspects of literacy, in mathematics and in science. Food for thought. Any other comments?
The very last comment that we've got on the sheet there has probably got a lot to do with that.
Yes, yeah. So if you link up the reading and parental involvement. Okay.
We very much, the Hong Kong team, thank you for your
Thank you.
engagement.